The best definition that I know of forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. And boy, is that strong.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and then Nelson Mandela has his famous, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for it to kill your enemy.
Wow. Yeah.
So those are much better statements than whatever statement you mentioned as to how people hold it. I'll tell you the biggest delusion that people operate under is that they're going to live forever. So from what I understand cancel culture to be, it's exactly the opposite of forgiveness. Like, I don't want you to speak. Your speaking is dangerous. You say the wrong things, so we can't trust you to speak. That's the opposite of forgiveness.
This is the I Choose Health podcast, where your stories of triumph empower others to overcome. Our guest today is the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, Dr. Fred Luskin. Welcome to 52 Choices, small powerful habits that build a healthier, stronger you. Today is time for habit 3. Add a source of protein to every meal. If you're working on building muscle, improving your energy, or managing hunger throughout the day, this one's for you. Habit 3 is simple. Make sure there's a source of protein in every meal. Why? Because science backs it up. A 12-week randomized controlled trial looked at healthy young men doing resistance training. Researchers found that evenly spreading protein across breakfast, lunch, and dinner led to more muscle growth compared to eating most of their protein at dinner. Even though both groups ate the same total protein, the ones with balanced meals saw better results. And that's huge. So what does this look like in real life? Well, you can start your day with scrambled tofu, coconut-based yogurt, or a plant-based protein shake. Lunch, maybe some lentils or beans. Dinner, think tofu, tempeh, or a lean veggie burger. Every meal counts. Protein isn't just for bodybuilders. It helps preserve muscle, stabilizes blood sugar, and keeps you fuller longer. So remember habit 3. Add a source of protein to every meal. One choice at a time, one better day at a time. We'll see you next week with habit 4. All right, guys, welcome back to the I Choose Health podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Leslie. Today we're honored to speak with Dr. Fred Luskin. He's the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project and one of the world's leading researchers on forgiveness. Dr. Luskin has helped thousands process deep pain and trauma through the practice of forgiveness. In this conversation, we explore how radical acts of forgiveness have brought profound healing, even in the aftermath of genocide, war, and personal tragedy. Dr. Luskin, welcome to I Choose Health podcast.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So Dr. Luskin, let's begin with the basics. What do you believe is the foundational reason why forgiveness can be so deeply healing even when the hurt is immense?
The problem with unforgiveness is how long it lasts. So there's nothing wrong with being hurt. In fact, that's a good thing. If somebody harms you or hurts somebody you love, only dead people don't feel stuff. That's not an issue. So it's like you want to be hurt if you need to. The problem comes when you're hurt and hurt and hurt and hurt and don't move on. And those emotional stuck points can turn into physical stuck points if you're not careful. That's the simplest answer that I can give you.
And that's so impactful, so deep as you were sharing that, in the ways in which unforgiveness can really stick us at a certain place in life, keeping us from advancing. And so, I want to talk about someone who dealt with a lot of hurt, dealt with a lot of tragedy, and they were still able to advance and process the hurt during their life and process that in a way that has really helped the rest of the world. And I want to talk about Immaculée Ilibazaga. She lost her entire family during the Rwandan genocide, but she chose to forgive the men responsible. Later, she started a foundation to help orphans of the violence. From a psychological point of view, how is it even possible for someone to move forward with forgiveness after such a personal devastation?
Yeah, I think I spoke to her once years ago, and there was a play made about her experience, a one-woman play that I saw on Stanford's campus. Her story is remarkable. But again, you come back to a very simple question. No matter what has happened to you, and I think she had to hide in a bathroom for a few months with and a minister protecting her. But think about this. You're stuck in that bathroom and you're scared out of your mind. And at one moment you may ask yourself, well, what's the best way to deal with this? So if I get out, I have a life. And if you're sitting in that bathroom and you're filled with hate, then you can feel your body being eaten. You just can feel it. And you can feel your mind like dying a little bit. So many people say, well, wait a second. This is eating me up, but it's not having any impact on any of the people doing me harm. So I know what she started to do was say prayers over and over and over again because she needed to heal herself. And so she rescued herself from inner bitterness so that she had a life to move forward to. And every one of us at some point, when we've been hurt, that question pops up. Is this the best way to deal with it? And the people who don't do well, they say, well, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is revenge or hatred or paying somebody back. And so they continue to burn themselves up. So, that's a big part of the question and answer that you're looking at, is that she used religious coping to keep herself from being eaten by her own negative experience.
Right. And, I want to take it a step further as well. There's a young man, I think Rick. There's a story of Rick's family, Kathy and Russ. After Rick was murdered, they not only forgave the man who killed him, they visited him in prison and advocated for his release. This seems to challenge our basic sense of justice. How do we distinguish forgiveness from condoning or excusing wrongdoing?
I mean, there is no one justice. That simply doesn't exist. There's no one way of looking at something that says justice. So you may have a bad thing happen to you, and I may have a bad thing happen to me, and we may end up very different about what we think the appropriate justice is. So you have to be careful with justice writ large. Now, at the same time, somebody could forgive something as horrible as that and say, I completely forgive you for what you did. Like they have some sense of Jesus's, forgive them. They know not what they do, even if it's a secular thing. Like, I don't know why this person was such an asshole, but it's not my problem. Like, that's their problem. So that's some people's, that's all they do. Other people say, well, I forgive them, and there's something in me that wants to reach out and make touch and contact with them. They're not better or worse. There's just individual ways of navigating through this. Condoning means that I'm saying what you did was okay. Forgiveness says what you did was not okay, but I'm not going to hold on to bitterness for my life. Those are very different things. The justice piece is separate because forgiveness is internal And justice is a kind of social thing. Like, what's the community thing is the appropriate response. And there are wide ranges of what that is. So that's my answer to you on that.
And, I think oftentimes, like, the way that we respond to situations are oftentimes dictated by what we think the community thinks our response should be. And to what extent do you think that has impacted people from experiencing the type of healing that they could get from forgiving an individual, forgiving a particular community? Have you seen situations where the expected community response or the expectations of the community kind of dictated how that person responded?
There's some really both good data and anecdote about how often communities hurt individuals who have been harmed. So if you're in a situation where your tribe is harmed by the other tribe, we did this with Catholics and Protestants. In the United States, Democrats and Republicans, blacks and whites, whatever. If your tribe feels that it was harmed by the other tribe, they will sometimes give you grief or threaten you if you release your bitterness, because the tribe uses it in their war against the other side. So we worked with people who had their children murdered, and we helped them forgive, but they went back to their own group, and their group treated them like traitors because they were no longer furious and no longer saying, you can use the murder of my child to want to harm the other side. They stepped out of that, and their side tried to both, push them and excommunicate them. It gets really tricky and really difficult.
Yeah. Because I could imagine the amount of inner emotional work that has to be done to deal with that type of hurt. I couldn't even begin to process that. There's like a part within me that just strongly says no to that type of forgiveness. And it's just really amazing when someone can do that, to get to that point, to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to forgive this person. And to what extent have you see that it's that they need for themselves to forgive that person because they're unable to move on with life? Or is it a lot of times a genuine, like, deep work where they're like, no, I'm actually forgiving this person, because it's the right thing to do?
Be both or either. One way you can look at this is almost like similar to chemotherapy. So if you really have a bad cancer, sometimes you take these horrible drugs that cause a lot of pain, but you need that kind of work to try to be free. If you've held a grudge for 20 years, it is rotting out your insides and influencing everything you say and do. Now, I'm not comparing forgiveness to chemotherapy, but I'm saying that sometimes you need serious medicine to come in there and right the ship that has been listing because it's so negative.
And, I know just prior to our conversation, I know you spoke about the workbook that you're using with individuals to help them through that. What practical steps have you seen to help people walk the path of forgiveness? And how might someone start when the pain feels overwhelming?
Well, you got to be careful not to push it. So pain being overwhelming is appropriate for a while. And that has nothing to do with forgiveness. That's called grief. That's normal, healthy, and needs to run its course. The problem for many people is they don't allow it to run its course and end. They hold on tightly. So when they find themselves relaxing a little and saying, I don't hate my ex anymore, Many people get uncomfortable with that, or they think that shit does not deserve to be let off the hook. So they don't free themselves. They keep it going. That's the danger. And once you practice keeping it going like that, then you're trapped because you create a story that explains why you can't let it go. You have practices that keep it going. Anytime somebody says to you, you know, your husband or wife really wasn't that bad, and you bark at them, even though it could be 5 years later, you're doing it to yourself.
Right.
And that's when forgiveness becomes a necessity.
Yeah. And talk about these stories that we create, because I remember in one previous podcast you spoke about a friend of yours that you were very close with, and he moved on, got married, and I think he hadn't even invited you to the wedding as well. Kind of like give us a background on that story as well, and maybe also tell us if that led to the work, the deeper work that you've done on forgiveness.
I did have a very close friend who abandoned and kind of betrayed me. And it did take me a long time to move past that, because now that I look back, my story imprisoned me. Not only did the story talk about my victimhood and how awful it was and how vulnerable I was, it kept him in a place where I kept him stuck. I didn't allow him to grow. I didn't allow him to move on. I kept him stuck in my story. But it's only after releasing it that I realized how stupid that was. You know, it's like, I'm even going to say, if you had bad parents in 1995, they're very different parents now, you know what I mean? And yes, they may have done what they did in 1995, but that's not who they are in 2025. No matter how much you want to imprison them in your past, everything has moved on. So there's an essential dishonesty to these victim stories. One of the things that anybody can do is just practice telling different stories until you find one that doesn't make you so pissed and vulnerable. Like, you can just do that. Like, you know, try this, try that, try talking about what you've learned, try talking about giving them a break, try talking about what kind of future you want rather than just the past. So that's one strategy. Another incredibly simple strategy is look for the good in your life. Don't complain so much. Look around, see beauty, find people who like you. Don't just overdo the painful relationships. And another strategy is, when you're pissed off or upset, relax. Take a breath. Just take care of yourself. Not keep on saying, I can't do anything about it because this rotten thing happened in the past. It's that statement by which we harm ourselves over and over and over.
Yeah. And, one thread, going back to the stories that we mentioned before with Immaculate and with Rick's family, one thread that we see is the search for meaning. And do you think finding meaning in our suffering is essential to the forgiveness process?
I mean, finding a search for meaning in everything appears to be essential for human beings. It's that famous, Viktor Frankl, if you give somebody a why, they'll figure out a how. There's a lot of truth to that. But suffering in particular, you have to figure out, again, it's a story. You have to figure out what it is you believe led to the suffering. So some people have a religious framing. So God or Jesus or teaching us something. Other people can have a mental health framing. I got blasted by this. I didn't know what to do. I need to, grow and figure out. Other people may simply have an existential suffering. Life sucks sometimes. You got to deal with it.
Yeah.
But each of us makes a meaning. The people who can't make a meaning except by demonizing other people or feeling sorry for themselves, that's the meaning that they make. And that meaning is what's so dangerous to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I do have some personal situations that I can refer to, which I cannot mention in this podcast as yet. But, when we talk about forgiveness, people look at a particular timeline. And is there ever a round time to talk about forgiveness? How do you know when someone is truly ready or when it might do more harm to push forgiveness too soon? I know you mentioned that just a brief moment ago.
Two answers to that. One is some modest research suggests that even life's real difficulties, and that they looked at like the end of a marriage or the death of a spouse, within 2 years, most people have started to move on. That, human beings are not meant to be stuck. We have brief lives, and there's a lot of stuff that happens. So we're actually not meant to stay stuck. So that's one. You give somebody a year or two on really difficult things to be safe, and then, it's like, hey, life has moved on. You might want to as well. But for something terrible like, your partner's cheating on you, a month later, you don't tell somebody to move on. But a year later, you might be able to say, hey, it's in the past a bit. Anyway, that's one. The second is we looked at some of the data and came up with a couple questions to pose to people, which is, one, have you told people what happened? Have you shared it? There's people who keep it to themselves. They suffer more. The stoic with not sharing, that's not good. So we would ask, have you shared your story with 3 or 4 people so that you get support and you're not alone? Because that's an essential piece. We also ask, are you sharing it with everybody? If so, that's bad news as well. Like not sharing it and putting it in highlights every time you talk to anybody. Those are both negatives, and you want to adjust either of those to move on. Secondly, have you really looked at the harm done? Which is different than saying this person was a jerk or I hate them. That's not what opens you to move on. What opens you to move on is to say, they did X, it caused Y, I have suffered from this. This is how I've suffered, and this is what they did. When that's clear, that means grief is starting to settle. I now have some clarity, so I don't have to beat them up every second because I know and the third piece is, have you explored some of the range of emotions? So if somebody was harmed and they're only pissed for 9 months, they probably need to touch some sadness and vulnerability and fear before they're done. If they're only depressed and won't walk out of the house, they need to touch being pissed. So those are 3 questions that you could see, generally speaking, Have they grieved? Are they ready to think about moving on? That they're not etched in sand or definitive, but those are basic ballparks.
And we've also seen with human beings the physical resilience, right? The feats of strength, but also talk about the emotional and psychological resilience that the act of forgiveness provides.
Well, you have to look at the lack of resilience that a grievance offers. So again, if you're 40 years old and still arguing about mom and dad, then you're saying, I am not resilient. You're like announcing it, even though you wouldn't put it that way. But you're saying, something happened to me 20 years ago that I haven't gotten over, so I'm a poster child for no resilience. That's what a grudge is. It's, I can't do this. I can't move on. I'm stuck. But it's their fault. So that in and of itself is anti-resilience. It's like shouting, I can't handle life. Resilience comes when you've made some peace with your own life. It's like, I can deal with this, even though it was painful and hard. I can deal with it, and I have dealt with it. And it's that way, it's not this way. So forgiveness is one of the great contributors to resilience. It's like, I don't have to be afraid of life because it was difficult. The people who don't forgive stay afraid of life because they haven't dealt with it successfully. So they're afraid of dating, or they're afraid of trusting, or they're afraid of engaging because they've been hurt and they haven't moved on. So the deep problem is the lack of moving on. We're not taught the costs of that commensurate with the actual costs.
Yeah. And, I want you to also take us back to the beginning. If there was a defining moment or personal experience that drew you into this work of forgiveness. I know that you spoke about your friend, and I think also in a previous podcast you spoke about, I think it was your mother-in-law, and the experience there as well. Just, take us back to that time and what defining moment drew you into this work on forgiveness.
A couple of things. One is, I've had a long-standing interest in the relationship between like science as a social scientist at Stanford and kind of spiritual practice. Like, I have a lot of belief in meditation, in the positive virtues like gratitude and compassion. I'm really interested is when they intersect, because I think it's good to know that science supports some of religious wisdom and some of all sorts of wisdom. Science also pushes back on some of it. Some of it may just be myths. So I think that's really important stuff, and that's been an interest of mine. So my first research project was because of that. Like, I want to prove that this religious thing actually works in a tangible way. The friend that had harmed me, it took me years to dig myself out from that, just years. And so I figured that, if it's that hard for me, and I'm not like mentally ill, I don't walk around like raging, boy, this is probably really difficult stuff. So that pushed my interest in forgiveness. And third, I had a supervisor at Stanford who was happy to collaborate with me on questions like this. Had I not had that, this might have never occurred. Like, it was an unknown field when I started, and I benefited from the grace of established older researchers at a major university who helped me. And that can't be separated, from how did I end up here? That's how I ended up here.
Did you ever receive any pushback? Because I do know that within academic circles, anything that seems to have somewhat of a religious connection, a lot of times is usually shunned. So did you have any pushback from your peers when this research came out?
Psychotherapists were hostile at times. What are you telling me, that you should forgive somebody who abused a kid? I got enough, because I think forgiveness threatens some of the business of psychotherapy. Like, we can talk about it for 2 years, or we can let it go. But at the beginning, our harshest audiences were therapists. Where I worked at Stanford, one of the scientists there found out that I was doing a forgiveness project, and they sent an email to the whole center saying, does everybody know we're supporting a forgiveness project, and where did that come from, and why are they doing it? I was again graced that a very senior member of the faculty was also one of my advisors, and he wrote back saying, relax, I'm supervising this in part. He's doing good work, and if there's any problem, I'll let you know. But yes, that was a real moment. And again, if he hadn't have jumped in, I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah. Wow. And did you always imagine that you'd be in this space teaching people how to let go of deep hurts? Or did life lead you here unexpectedly?
What space is that?
Just in this space, just teaching people the work of dealing with forgiveness, of just letting go of deep hurts.
Never entered my mind. I will tell you, it's a long time ago, but it's true. When we were recruiting for a big research project, Stanford put out a fax at that time that we're doing this big project. We're looking for volunteers. It's unique. This is 25 years ago, but that exact moment, Monica Lewinsky's dress with Bill Clinton's semen also hit the news media at the same time. And they put those two faxes together and called me and our team like 20 times asking if Hillary should forgive Bill. And that's what launched us as forgiveness experts, not the research, but that moment of synchronicity. So no, it never entered my mind. I just thought I was doing a research project.
It's interesting that, you made that reference, because I was having this conversation actually weeks ago about Monica Lewinsky, and to an extent in which I feel like society hasn't quite forgiven her.
I know.
I wonder how she has rebounded from that situation. I was only a kid when that scenario occurred, but I do remember the impact that had on her and the way that she was perceived at the time.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time when you watch politics, because, people hold to their tribal allegiances more than their values. So at that time, the Democrats were supporting Bill Clinton. Even the feminists were supporting Bill Clinton, who was taking advantage of an intern who was half his age. Now the Democrats are all bent because Donald Trump has moral failings, and Republicans are more, supportive of him. And the Democrats would sugarcoat, Joe Biden's, his problems at the end, and the Republicans. So there's this endless, my side's okay, your side's not okay. And I believe Monica Lewinsky got caught in that. The Republicans were all about character until it's their people. And the Democrats were excusing bad character because it's their people. And she was a 20-year-old intern who would have no way of understanding or dealing with any of that.
Yeah.
I did have an interesting experience once where I met somebody who knew her, I'm going to say more than a decade ago. And they told me from personal conversation, she was still struggling just a little bit with forgiving everything that had happened to her. I've never talked to her. I don't know her at all. But somebody did say that to me. You know, this is still years ago. But I could understand, like, she was caught in a totally not of her making.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And, you've worked with people who suffered unimaginable losses. What has surprised you most about how humans process hurt and resentment?
I mean, the bottom line is that people are often better at it than you would think. That, yes, Immaculée is a remarkable example. But many, many, many people suffer losses and trauma and difficulty and go on to live reasonably good lives. If you look at all the veterans that came home from World War II and, became part of probably, my lifetime, certainly, the strongest example of America, many of them had been through absolute hell. And they came back and they raised their families and they worked hard at jobs and they loved their partners. And human beings have an enormous capacity for resilience. That doesn't mean everybody gets it. But the bottom line is we're a pretty remarkable species.
Yeah. And I know that in your book, Forgive for Good, you outline practical tools for letting go of resentment. And currently, how do you explain forgiveness to someone who believes that forgiveness is letting the other person off the hook?
The best definition that I know of forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. And boy, is that strong.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and then Nelson Mandela has his famous, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for it to kill your enemy.
Wow. Yeah.
So, those are much better statements than whatever statement you mentioned as to how people hold it. I'll tell you the biggest delusion that people operate under is that they're going to live forever. So if you recognize you're not going to live forever and you don't know how long, then you ask yourself much better questions like, if I have 20 years left or 40 years left or 5 years left, how do I want to live those?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I hold on to bitterness, is that the best I can do with my time left? But people manufacture this, I don't even know what it is, like fantasy that I have forever. And they don't. And that fantasy leads them to make really poor decisions.
As a millennial and someone who has to process and deal with the idea of cancel culture, we're living in a time of like widespread emotional exhaustion and polarization. What does forgiveness look like in a world like this, right? Where it's, everyone's on pins and needles. They're afraid of saying certain things because, this is going to affect their bottom line. How do we process or deal with forgiveness in a world that is maybe not so forgiving?
I mean, there's two answers to that. One, from what I understand cancel culture to be, it's exactly the opposite of forgiveness. Like, I don't want you to speak. Your speaking is dangerous. You say the wrong things, so we can't trust you to speak. That's the opposite of forgiveness. Like, on the other hand, forgiveness also emerges because you know in your bones that nobody sees the world exactly the way you do. So there's always going to be different viewpoints, different histories, different cultures, that you don't own the truth. So forgiveness, it needs to be at some level built in. To me, it's the one of the reality reactions of a world that is incredibly diverse. People look different, they sound different, they have different values, they want different things, they're from different places, they think differently. There is so much diversity. So in order to hold that, you have to remind yourself that there are going to be moments where the world doesn't agree with you, or it doesn't see things the way you do at all, and that you're going to be wrong a lot of times, just like everybody else is going to be wrong a lot of times. So you want to build up at least a basic forgiveness to deal with how life actually is. So again, remembering you're going to be dead at some point, and remembering this is a big, diverse, wiggly world, are really good trainings that make forgiveness make more sense. As a millennial, or any generation, you're going to inherit a lot of crap from the generations before you. But you need the humility to recognize that you're also going to create a lot of crap for the generations that come after you.
Yeah, and that's the humility that we all need to realize the footprint that we leave on the world, and I think that's so vital for us to progress as a community.
It's also true.
Yeah. And since this is the I Choose Health podcast, what do we now understand about the physical health benefits of forgiveness?
I mean, forgiveness is an exemplar of the problem with stress in particular, but also the problem of perseverating on bad ideas. Both of them cause all sorts of neuroendocrine changes that make people muscularly tight, that dysregulate the immune system, that raise your blood pressure, that cause your nervous system to go batty. The problem with unforgiveness is it becomes chronic. So you're chronically stressed, you're chronically vulnerable to stress and bad ideas. Those stress has an impact on our weakest systems. Everybody's effect is different, but where you're weakest, stress comes in and goes, it also intensifies the experience of pain, and if it's unchecked, is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. These are subtle but pervasive experiences of not resolving your emotional wounds. That's probably my simplest response to you.
And as we're starting to wind down, if you could embed, and we're not obviously not wanting to force anything, but if we could embed one belief or practice into every school, workplace, or home, what would that be?
That after grieving wounds, losses, pain, you are mostly responsible moving ahead for your emotional well-being.
I couldn't say any better. And you've already left an extraordinary mark. Is there a next chapter for you, or a question you're still exploring?
I just released a workbook called the Forgive for Good workbook. It's aimed at people in recovery, but it's all of our methods. It's the culmination of 25 years of research. I We just put it all together, and it's a step-by-step workbook, which is helpful. And that came about from doing some research on how forgiveness helps people in recovery. So that's a recent past and current exploration. The only other thing is I'm working with another forgiveness person on thinking about how we bring forgiveness a little more into the political world. The question you asked, we don't have any great answers yet, but that's an area of interest for me. That would be my response.
And, for anyone listening today who feels like they could never forgive what was done to them, what would you say to them from both your research and from your heart?
I mean, there are some people who have been wounded so terribly that it would be too big a stretch to forgive something. So we would say to them, well, you still need to learn how to forgive. So why don't you practice with somebody you love that you're holding a grudge against, like somebody close to you, and let that go. So one, you'll help your relationship, and two, you'll practice something you need. Maybe down the road, you'll be more capable or interested in forgiving this thing. But please don't use that as a reason to reject forgiveness itself. That would be what I would say to them.
Thank you, Dr. Luskin. And is there a place where our listeners can find you, whether that's on social media or any place where we can reach out to you?
My website is fredluskin.com, but if you simply Google me, there's like 100 videos and all sorts of stuff.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Luskin. And thank you for your work, your heart, and your time. You've given us all a little bit more courage to let go and move forward. Thank you for helping us understand that forgiveness isn't weakness, but it's strength, and that healing is possible even in the most broken places.
That is true.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. This is the I Choose Health podcast. Again, we are so thankful to Dr. Luskin for giving us his time, his wisdom, and his research. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next show.